Okay, good morning, class, and welcome back to our IS101 journey through Excel. This morning we're going to talk about three new topics: name ranges, freezing rows and columns, and hiding rows and columns. We briefly talked about name ranges the other day, but I'm going to give you a little more information on it. Okay, so here we go. Here you have some dummy data. Imaginary hardware store. This column shows what tools you're selling. This column shows how much you paid for each tool. These are some expensive tools. And this column over here represents what you decided to be would be a fair price to sell each tool at. So one day you decided that you need to raise your profit margin, so you decide to increase the selling price on all these tools by 15%. Well, you could do this a couple of ways. The most logical way, the easiest way, would be to create a formula over here. So you start a formula with an equal sign. You would take the value over here in L3, put a multiplication sign in there, and then you say 1.15, close the parentheses. Don't even need parentheses here, actually. Press the enter key, and there's a 15% increase over 67.80 up to 77.99. And then, of course, you can use the autofill handle to drag down and get your increases in place very nicely and very easily. Okay, now I'm going to erase all this information here, and I'm going to fix my bottom cell here. Okay, so now I want to show you how to do this using name ranges, because name ranges, if you have a lot of information and a lot of formulas and you're looking at the formulas, it can be easier to identify the information that you're manipulating if you give it a name. So let's give a name to this information right here. And the way you do that is you highlight the information, you go up here to the name box, and you give it a name. Now, whatever name you give it can have no spaces in it, so you could not call it sell price with a space in it. You'd have to call it sell underscore price, like that. Okay, so now you've just given a name to this block of information here. Now, if we go back to our formula, and we'll build it again, we'll say equal, and now that you gave a name to that range, if you start to type the first letter of it, you'll see it turns up in the list of all the functions that begin with S. So you can easily just double click on it here, sell price, put the multiplication sign in, and then 1.15, and there you go. Use the autofill handle to drag down, and there's the same results using a name range. Okay, so when applying named ranges, where it might come in handy is if you have a lot of different columns with a lot of different names and you want to see what your formulas look like, and you can understand exactly what you're doing in your formula a lot easier when you look at information that has a name applied to it. So, for example, if you go up to the formula tab here in Excel, over here in the formula auditing section, there is a button right here that says show formulas. So if we click on that, it expands our sheet here and it actually shows the formula. So if you can look over here in column N, you can see that what we're doing is sell underscore price times 1.15. So this is really easy to understand what we're doing. If we had equal L3 times 1.15, then we would need to go over and look to see what column L3 was all about. If we look at it this way with the sell price showing instead of reference to the cell in the column, then it's much easier to understand what we're doing with this formula here. Sell price times 1.15. So this is where using name ranges comes into a handy place sometime. And you can turn off the showing of the formulas by just toggling back on the Show Formula button. Now, you might need to change your name range sometime, edit it, delete it, whatever. To do that, you go to the Formulas tab, and there's something here called a Name Manager. Click on that. You can see the range that we created. We call it Sell Price. Here you can edit it, or you can delete it. If you want to edit it, you can change the name or change the criteria that defines the name range. But right now, we're just going to cancel out of there. Okay, so that is really what ranges are all about. You can also define a name up here without having to write it in this area over here in the name box. You can just highlight your information and click on define a name, and then using formula, this will help you build a formula using your name range. So that's all we'll talk about for name ranges. We're going to move on now to freezing rows and columns. So we'll get to this sheet here. This is a bunch of dummy information I made up. Each column represents a different state in the United States, and each row represents a different type of crime. I made these up too. Some of them are real, some of them are not. Anyway, you can see that all the states will not fit on one screen. You have to scroll to the right to see all the states, and also the crimes will not fit on one screen either. You have to scroll down. So look what happens when you scroll down to look at the different crimes. The first row that identifies the states leaves the screen, so you don't know what state you're talking about here. And look what happens when you scroll to the right to look at the different states. The crime column disappears. So that's something we want to be able to prevent from happening. And the way we do that is called freezing rows and columns. So if you go into the View tab, and here's the button right here, Freeze Panes. So if you click on that, you get three choices here. You can freeze the top row, freeze the first column, or freeze panes, which lets you freeze rows and columns. If you click on freeze top row, well, you can be anywhere in this sheet here. You could be right here, click on freeze top row, and now when you scroll down, you can see the states row does not leave the screen. Okay, if you want to remove that, you can unfreeze panes. Also, you can click anywhere and go in here, freeze panes, and freeze first column. And now when you scroll to the right, the columns stay on the screen, the first column with the crimes in it. If you go back here and you unfreeze panes, if you click right below and right to the right of the row and column you want to freeze, then you can do both at one time. So if you want to make sure we freeze everything above this cell here and everything to the left of it, then you would click in this cell, you go into freeze panes, and you would say freeze panes. So now when you scroll down, it keeps the first row in place, and when you scroll to the right, it keeps the first column in place. So that is a very useful thing to know to do when you have information that goes beyond the boundaries of the screen, both column-wise and row-wise. And when you're all done, you can go back in here, and whatever panes you've frozen will come unfrozen when you click on unfreeze panes. Okay, and the last thing we're going to talk about here now is hiding and unhiding columns and rows. So if we come in here, I've just created some more dummy data. Got a block of 3 rows, 3 columns of information here, and a block of 4 rows of information. So sometimes, for whatever reason, you might want to not show a row or a column or a bunch of rows or a bunch of columns. So here's how you do that. So, for example, if you wanted to hide column J, you'd click right here, column J, go to the Home tab, go up here to the Format button in the Cells group and click on Hide and Unhide, and you would do a hide column. So there you can see that the middle column there is unhidden. If you want to bring the column back, you have to highlight the one that's to the left of it and the one that's to the right of it. Go back into the Format and go back into Hide and Unhide, and you would do Unhide Columns. And there column J comes back in. The same thing applies to rows. Say you wanted to hide rows 16 and 17. You can just click here and select the indicator for both rows. Go back up here to the Format button, click on Hide and Unhide, hide rows, and now we've got those two rows hidden. And of course, if you want to bring them back, you've got to select the row above it and the row below it. Go back into Format, Hide and Unhide, and unhide rows, and presto, the rows that you hid are back on the screen. Okay, so we talked about name ranges, freezing rows and columns, and hiding and unhiding rows and columns. And that's all we're going to cover for today. We'll pick up some more topics tomorrow. So hope you enjoyed the video.